Oh, hey babes, Laci here. It is a sweaty LA night, the perfect time to talk about trigger warnings.
Well, here in my little corner of hell, it's rainy and dark, so yes, it's a perfect time to talk about those trigger warnings.
There's been a bunch of, verbal vomit about trigger warnings the past year or so.
Verbal vomit? As much as I detest the way that you phrased that, yes, there has been an awful lot of word vomit regarding the issue of trigger warnings. Mostly because people use it as a way to escape anything that contradicts their belief.
Most recently, the University of Chicago released this letter to incoming freshmen.
Yeah, shame on the University of Chicago. Don't you know you're not supposed to warn your students that you're actually taking them out of their safe space before you actually do it? Don't you know better? You have offended the victim queen. Shame.
They said, quote, "Our commitment to academic freedom means we don't support so-called trigger warnings."
Note the wording on that. They don't support so-called trigger warnings. In other words, probably the group of trigger warnings that allow people to go into a safe space where they can retreat from ideas that contradict their own. But I guess you're just going to gloss over that wording.
We don't cancel invited speakers because their topics might prove controversial, and we don't condone the creation of intellectual safe spaces where individuals can retreat from ideas and perspectives at odds with their own.
How dare a college try to take me out of my safe space by making me actually come out of it to learn something? Don't they know they have to make all the information coincide with what I already believe?
The problem with this statement is the same problem with a lot of critiques of trigger warnings on the internet, and that's not what a trigger warning is.
Let's look at some of the definitions for trigger warnings that I found on the internet, shall we? The first one addresses people that are dealing with grief. The second one addresses people that are dealing with a traumatic event. The third one addresses people that are easily offended. And the third one is actually what occurs most often, which is why it's critiqued quite heavily.
It is not a retreat from ideas and perspectives. If it is actually being used in that way, then the trigger warning is being misused.
I find that wording a little bit disingenuous. So let me clear it up a little bit. A trigger warning itself is not a retreat from an idea or perspective that a person doesn't like. It's a warning that it exists in content, which allows a person to avoid that content altogether so that they can stay in their own little safe haven or safe space. So yes, Laci, it is actually being used in that way. And yes, it is actually being misused, and it's being misused by people like you, who don't want to confront those opinions or perspectives that you don't necessarily agree with.
I first became aware of trigger warnings when I was in college, but it was not in class, it was during an internship. I was working with domestic abuse survivors at a state agency.
Well, domestic abuse falls under the category of traumatic event, and yes, people who suffered a traumatic event do need trigger warnings. This is because they can be triggered by some very mundane things, and they can be triggered violently by these very mundane things.
Trigger warnings exist to give someone a little bit of a buffer before confronting them with information, graphics, whatever that may be deeply painful and upsetting.
As a person who actually suffered abuse, when somebody tells me that they need a buffer between them and information, or they need a buffer between them and an image, I tell them they're full of shit.
They're specifically used in populations which may be experiencing higher levels of trauma to help them cope, compartmentalize, and keep moving forward.
She tries to drag this out, but essentially what she's saying is that the populations of people in colleges and stuff like that who are being triggered by, like, their teachers teaching a topic that they don't necessarily want to hear about are on the same level as a person who has suffered from domestic abuse, and that's absolutely ridiculous.
Now, I think where things got a little bit more complex and thus more controversial is when they were translated for usage in the blogosphere. Now you have online communities that want very specific trigger warnings, people talking about very specific things.
And now we're on to blogs.
I don't think it's up to me to say, oh, people overuse trigger warnings or whatever. But
people do overuse and abuse trigger warnings. That's why it's being banned from that particular campus. They don't want their students using it as a way to retreat to intellectual safe spaces.
But I do think the demand for really specific trigger warnings in very general settings has been used to undermine the legitimacy and value of trigger warnings as a whole.
You think so? And here I was blaming Beelzebub. Guess I owe that guy an apology.
Another observation worth noting is that trigger warnings are part of a broader ideology.
Ideology! So it is a fucking cult! Well done, you guys have stolen the term trigger warnings for your fucking cult. Good job. Well done.
Where people's experiences and people's needs are taken into account. It's more of a nurturing culture.
Eonk, eonk. My cult is super nurturing, even though it actively works to destroy people that disagree with it. Eonk, eonk.
Trigger warnings and the culture that surrounds them runs directly contradictory to hyper masculinity, where everyone's tough and we make fun of people who are weak little pussy crybabies.
Let me get this right. If someone disagrees with your definition of trigger warnings, then they're automatically masculine. Oh no, I think I know what's coming next. Don't say it, Laci! No, don't!
The backlash to trigger warnings isn't necessarily sexist, but I think that it is fueled by sexism.
I hate when I'm right about stuff like this. Laci, the school banned these so-called trigger warnings and safe spaces not because they wanted to be sexist, but because it's a school environment. You know, a school environment where the teachers, their job is to give you new ideas and new perspectives on things, some of which that you're gonna disagree with.
Okay, I'm almost done with my very tired rant. I'm going to end on what I actually agree with the Dean on, and that's that controversial speakers, short of hate speech, should not be banned from speaking at universities.
Oh yeah, I totally agree this was a very tired rant. But as a curiosity, what constitutes as hate speech for you people? Because it seems like it's anything that you disagree with.
That's ridiculous. Censorship is not the answer to social justice problems. I am intimately familiar with this issue because I have been targeted for censorship.
Yeah, you are intimately involved in censorship because you try to censor people that you don't agree with. According to you, you're the victim of censorship, but then you go on to try to censor people. Guess what? Two wrongs don't make a right.
Alright, those are my thoughts. I definitely want to know what you all think.
You're an asshole!
This is something that has actually affected you at school. I'm particularly curious about that because there is actually some data to suggest that this whole trigger warnings on campus panic is completely overblown in the first place. Like, not a lot of people are actually complaining about this to professors. So, it's internet drama for you.
Really, is that so?
Complaining about this to professors.
Complaining about this to professors.
That's right, the only people bothered by these so-called trigger warnings and safe spaces are masculine, sexist professors. Laci, PA has a little warning for you.
Let's avoid fighting. You're not worth it.
Well, that's about it for this video. I'm Demon Teddy, thanking you for coming to watch. Now, I have to go take some painkillers and weep over how the human race is slowly becoming stupider. Demon Teddy out.